I'm Jean Impey, and I'm here at the Hoffman offices in Mission Viejo, and today I'm going to share with you our Hooked on Hoffman. I mentioned to you that we were going to talk about the Wine Club kit, and this is it right here. You can get it from your local quilt store. If you go in and they don't have it, tell them to call our offices and we'll get it out to them right away. What it comes with is all your fabric that you need, and some great instructions and good photos. You get it in this kit bag, and it tells you the 12 watercolor fabrics that come with it, and it gives you some pictures and directions. So the kit is set up that you have enough fabric to make it all. And let's just get into it and talk now. The first thing you're going to want to do is to grab the pattern pieces. And they are going to be paper pieced. And you'll see that it's a two-shot, so you're going to match this up and tape it together. And just use regular Scotch tape because you're going to cut through it. And print them off. Now for the quilt, it takes 21 bottles. And for the table runner, you can make it with 21 bottles or go ahead and make more. I'm sure you'll find there's some extra fabric. So as you're Xeroxing these out, it doesn't matter if they're colored or black and white. So you can save your ink. It prints with 2 up, so I'm just going to take it to my cutting board. And I use a paper rotary cutter. All right, so you're just going to line up your pattern pieces. And I use an old blade in a rotary so I can cut paper. And I've just dissected them in half. Now if you look, you have 4 sections. Section A, Section B, Section C, and Section D. So you're just going to cut those apart so you can work with them one at a time. And let's get sewing. All right, I have all 4 sections. Let's start with A and put these away till we need them. So for the bottle part, which is A, we need some fabrics. And depending on what color bottle you're starting with, you're going to grab them. This will go into the A8 section. This will go into the A2 section. And this will go into the bottle. So I'm going to start with A1 and A2. So A1 and A2, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to fold right on that line and just close them. And then you're going to take your fabric for A1, and I just cut a strip of 3.5 inches, and I cut my labels from that. And I'm going to want that to fit within this parameter and be 1/4 inch over that line. And then I need the bottle portion, and I picked this light green. And so if I want to match those up first, it's probably easier. Now I'm going to lay it down. I'm going to place it there, giving myself a 1/4 inch seam. I'm going to open this back up and I'm going to stitch starting right there, going to there. Now when you're working with paper piecing, you want to use a really small stitch because you don't want to spend all your time tearing it out. So I'm going to set my machine at 1.5. I'm going to put my needle down right into the intersection there. Drop my feed dogs. Double check that I am not wonky under there. And just sew. Stopping at the intersection. And so you can see I've sewn from there to there. Now when I turn it over, this is what I get. So let's iron this down to keep it flat. So you're sewing your fabric to the back side of your pattern. You're sewing on the front of it so you can see all the lines. So now that we've sewn that on, it's time to do A3 and we'll do A5 at the same time. So just like we did before, I'm going to start up here. I'm going to fold it on that line, and you can see that I have a lot hanging over. It's always better with paper piecing to have a little more. And then I like to use my add 1/4 inch ruler. So I'm going to put it on my cutting board, and I'm going to it has a little ridge right here at 1/4 inch. I'm gonna hook that against the paper and I'm gonna trim it. Once I do that, I have a perfect 1/4 inch seam. So now I just have to figure out what goes here in A3, and I know it's the bottle. Remember I said I did a 3.5 inch strip. So I'm gonna lay that there, right along that 1/4 inch, same as we did. Open up the paper. I'm gonna sew, now there's a 1/4 inch seam allowance here. I'm gonna start at the 1/4 inch seam allowance. It's not necessary, but it gives you cleaner seams. So again, I'm gonna put my needle down, and I'm going to drop my feed dog. I'm gonna peek underneath, I'm still lined up. Sewn from this seam allowance to this, right across this line. And when we turn it over, we have our 1/4 inch seam, which I can do that. And then I'm gonna press it nice and flat. When you're paper piecing, you do wanna press along the way. And then I have this hanging over, so I'm just going to trim that seam allowance, so that I have the remainder and I can do A5. So, like I did before, I'm gonna fold it on the seam. I'm gonna trim my excess, 1/4 inch ruler. I'm gonna line up this piece so that it matches the 1/4 inch. I'm gonna unfold, and I'm gonna sew from the seam allowance to the seam allowance along that line. Carefully putting my needle down, using a small stitch. Opening it up, and you can see the bottle's beginning to be made. So let's iron that and trim it. So now I have the bottle somewhat made. I'm gonna turn it over and see what I have next to do. And I have these little corners, and I'm gonna use my background color. So, like we've been doing, we're gonna fold the corner right on the line. And I have that piece, so I'm gonna again trim it so that I have my perfect 1/4 inch to line up to. Now for the background piece, I'm using 1.5 inch strips of the background. And I don't cut it down further than that. So again, I'm gonna line it up. And I have to make sure I need this whole piece, this and out to the seams and out, filled. So when I turn it here, if the back side of this doesn't have fabric under it, don't sew it. That's why I'm using 1.5 inches. And I'm gonna come in right on that fold, and I'm gonna come out across the seam allowance. So you get something that looks like this, and when I iron it out, then I'll be able to trim it, and I'll trim it now just to show you. And you're gonna trim on the dotted line. And so, see, that's how the corners are made. You're gonna do that to the remaining 3 corners. All right, we have all 4 corners on, so let's trim that. Now there's 2 ends. You notice there's an A8 here. We're gonna trim that differently, but let's start at this side and trim that and clean it up, because we only have 1 more piece to put on and we're done with section A. Okay, so you can see that the top of the bottle, this way, has the corners, and the bottom still has a piece here. So I can't just cut those across, because like with everything else, I have to fold on that line, and it's within the 1/4 inch, so I don't really need to trim. But now I need to take the brown color, match it up, unfold it, and I'm going to sew from that selvage to that selvage. And now we'll press it and trim it. So finish trimming. And section A is complete. You can work like a workroom and do a lot of these bottles and then move on to section B. So let's move on to section B. All right, this is section B, and I have the pieces pulled. Now, the brown I always cut at 1 3/4 inches, and the sides next to the stem of the bottle, I do it 1 3/4, so the background. So I cut that in lengths. We're going to start with B1, which would be the top of the wine bottle, and then we're going to add the background. So same thing. This is on an angle, notice. So I'm going to crease it there. I'm going to line this up, and I'm going to put the purple on the top here, or on the bottom, with a 1/4 inch. Now you're going to have to peek at this because the purple has to have a 1/4 inch on each side, and it's giving you the seam allowance here but not up here. So we need to slide this background to match that, and we're going to sew on the line from B4 down through the end of the seam allowance. So drop my feed dogs, make sure I'm lined up. And so this is what that looks like. So let's iron it because this needs to be trimmed. Why'd you cut there?
No,
Well, that was fun. All right, so when we fold this, you notice that this is a trapezoid. It's not a square. So when we fold it, we have an angle there. So I'm going to, again, use my 1/4 inch ruler, trim it off. And so now I have the perfect piece to sew. All right, so I've trimmed that. Now I've got to put the same fabric on the other side. So I'm going to line it up with my 1/4 inch. I'm going to fold it on that line and make sure I'm good. And this time I'll sew from this end and stop there. There's one more piece left, and that would be the brown piece. That's our trim. So I'm going to fold here on B4. But what am I going to do next? I'm going to trim this off so I have a perfect 1/4 inch. I'm going to line it up. It's lined up. I'm going to open that, and I'm going to sew from that seam allowance to this seam allowance, sewing right across from seam allowance to seam allowance. And then we're ready to press that and trim our block B. All right, and so we have finished block B, which will go together with block A as soon as we finish C and D. Okay, let's move on to section C. It's a very small one, and you probably have the system down now, but let me help you. So I've cut an angle on this first piece, C1, and I'm going to fold that, and I can place that somewhere on there. It's not the same exact angle, but that's fine. And now I need this piece there, so I'm going to match this piece up. Now, a tip for this is this piece of paper needs to have fabric underneath it. If it were going like this, you'd have a problem. So that's your double check right there. So I can see that I have the blue under there. So again, let's unfold it. let's stitch through the seam allowance, and I just